Ready.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation Planning Committee. My name is Neil Cameron and I chair this committee. I'm going to ask other members of the committee to introduce themselves before we turn to the agenda. Start with Valerie.
Thank you. I'm Valerie and I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee and a non-exec board member of the EDC.
I'm Penny Marsh and I'm the independent member of the Planning Committee.
I'm Fred Marudas and I'm a non-executive director at EDC.
I'm Councillor David Moat. I'm Cabinet Member for Housing for Dartford Borough Council.
Thank you. So we'll turn to the agenda. First of all, apologies for absence. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Lee Croxton. And I don't think we can have any other apologies for absence. So we'll note that. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest other than the standing declaration? No. Urgent items? Any urgent items?
No.
Next, we are asked to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 13th of December 2023. I just have one query on the minutes. Others might have other queries. Paragraph 7, we consider the validation checklist, and at the end it says, after a general discussion between committee members, the chair proposed to accept the recommendation, thanks the officers for contributing to the review of the checklist, but it doesn't say whether we agreed with my proposal or not. And I think we did. So I think we probably ought to record that.
Yes, apologies. Yes, the committee did agree with that, so we'll make a note of that in the minutes. Thank you.
Are there any other comments on the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. Well, I think rather than make a note there, we approve those minutes subject to that change.
Okay.
Otherwise, we have minutes of minutes. Yeah. Thank you. So we turn to item 5, planning enforcement plan, and who's going to introduce this? Michael.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, I'll do a short intro into the document that's appended to the pack. So this report it seeks approval of the planning enforcement plan for Ebbsfleet. By way of obviously background leading into it, so EDC has the majority of planning enforcement powers been transferred to us from the local authorities, like we do with the DM powers. EDC has a planning enforcement officer, so Adam Skinner, in the back here, is our enforcement officer. He's enforcement and compliance officer, which sort of shows the role is enforcement, but also the more proactive compliance and progress on site with developments as well. So NPPF talks about effective enforcement is important to maintain public confidence in the planning system. So it's a discretionary service, but there's a duty to investigate alleged breaches, and then the decision to take or not to take formal action is discretionary, having regard to expediency and proportionality in the public interest. Over recent years, cases have increased a little bit. We've got more residents obviously moving in now. We're up to sort of 4,000 homes. There's a lot of people living here. Householders wanted to do different things on their homes, etc., etc. There's also been enforcement work covers other things, for example, breach of planning conditions, and we've had some cases with developers where certain conditions have been being breached. So we've taken some action on those. So I think in terms of a very brief background in EDC enforcement today, we've issued one enforcement notice, which is the householder case for a garage conversion. We've issued various breach of condition notices to developers. These are primarily, I think, been around construction activities, and when maybe there's been noise and dust that hasn't been quite in accordance with the approved construction management plans. So we've taken action to sort of address those issues there, and then various planning contravention notices we've served, which is really a sort of fact-finding mission when we're investigating potential alleged breaches. So I think we kind of got to the point now where, because of the level of work, we felt there was the need to provide some transparency and consistency in terms of our approach to enforcement, hence sort of developing a planning enforcement plan. It's not a requirement, but it's kind of almost a recommendation of national guidance. And the document that we prepared is deliberately kept fairly short and manageable. It sets out our key principles for enforcement, which really is around seeking solutions, trying to resolve issues before, and it's very much seeing enforcement action as a last resort. And it does kind of categorise cases in terms of where we prioritise resources. So A, B, and C are the sort of different levels that have been identified. It sets out the timeframes for responding to those breaches. Well, obviously, you know, we've got one enforcement officer, so and we do need to prioritise cases where necessary. And the report talks about how the public can report breaches, which I think is important. Sets out contact details. It also makes the point that we won't investigate anonymous complaints as well, to try and filter out those that maybe aren't as applicable. It sets out possible outcomes and options that are available to us as the local planning authority in terms of taking action, and it also sets out which planning powers do still remain with the local authorities of Gresham and Dartford. So that's probably it in terms of an intro. The recommendation has been slightly updated, or recommended to be slightly updated from the one in the report. So the recommendation is that the document is published, it's agreed and published on our websites. And the second part is that authority is delegated to the Director of Planning in place to provide changes to the document from time to time to reflect any changes to legislation or policy. That second point is a slight tweak. It slightly widens it up to allow a bit more scope to change things. For example, the recent Levelling and Regeneration Act introduces powers to make various changes for enforcement. So they're not enforced yet, but they're expected over the coming months, years, whatever. So we're just looking to kind of open up that resolution to allow those changes to be incorporated without having to necessarily come back for agreement. And that's the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd just like to say something about this and then open it up to general debate. I think it's important that we do have a policy, so it's transparent and people know when enforcement powers are likely to be used. I mean, the hope is that by having the powers, you don't have to use them, because you can persuade people not to breach planning control, and or if they do, to remedy it. Now, I'd just like to make one or two rather might be thought to be slightly finicky comments, but within that general context, that we ought to be act proportionately, sensibly, in order to protect amenity, but not to rush in to taking formal action if informal action can result in the outcome that we want. On the proposed resolution, first finicky point, you said Director of Planning in place to provide changes. Can we change provide to make? Because he could provide them and nothing gets done with them. We want them actually made. And in the document, you explain the categories. Category B, any authorised development, it's on page probably 7 or 8. Any unauthorised development or activity which causes clear, immediate, continuous harm to the locality and adjoining residents, and is a source of significant public concern. I don't think it should be harm to both locality and adjoining residents, because you might have something which causes harm to the locality, but not to an adjoining resident, because it's in the middle of a non-residential area. So it should be all adjoining residents. And presumably the last bit, and is the source of significant public concern, is to put it in category B compared to C. Is that the reason for the source of significant public concern?
Yeah, that sort of ramps up the priority of that case. Yeah.
But so I would suggest changing that to 4, and the other little pretty finicky point is when you have your what is a breach of planning control on page 5. This is real kind of legal technicality, Tommy, but breach of planning control is defined in the Act, and the list of items you've got there include matters which don't fall within that description. So I think perhaps the heading should be something like what types of breach does this policy address or deal with, something like that? So enough particularly points from me, but well done in drawing this up. It's really useful. Anybody else?
You've inspired me to a finicky point.
Right, there we go.
Which I'm going to start with. Well, look, I'm not going to start with it. I've read quite a few non-enforcement policies recently. I think this is a really good enforcement policy. I think it balances exactly as Neil described. The way we will enforce, if there's a breach, we can't remedy otherwise. I think that's exactly the right term. I think it provides reassurance to the public that there are remedies where those remedies. I thought it was really good. I've seen others not so good. Couple of points. The key point, I'm still slightly wonder whether on category B, first bullet point, that ought to be an always a sort of thing. Just because I think if it is significant public concern, it may be worth starting off an investigation 5 days earlier than you would otherwise. It's, you'll just save yourself an awful headaches and phone calls. So that would be my predicting. The other thing, which I'm sure we will do anyway, but if you will, you might say so, is respond to people pretty well immediately to say when they can expect the investigation to start. So, do an initial triage, because you kind of have to do a triage with everything that comes in and sort of say, well, this is just right. Thank you so much. We'll start investigating or we'll stop. Frankly, if someone hears that you're going to investigate something within 10 days, that's about sort of 2 months earlier than they'll expect you to do anyway. So that's good, but it gives people a context early on.
Yeah. I think routinely we would acknowledge receipt of this type of thing. Maybe we don't say it.
If you go a little further and just say what you're going to do about it in what time is that, it just helps.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think subject to this being agreed today, what we'll then move on to is then internal procedures, and I think what and we should thought about some of those site visit events, because then at least the people the particular issue is there within. So yes, we can then do an acknowledgement letter. We can then explain the categorization and explain what that first part is.
That's basically. But I thought it was really good.
You're talking about sort of a timeline of activity, which actions follow the right line of when it starts to when it finishes, I guess.
Well, it's difficult, I think, after this, because we can always commit to an initial site visit, but after that, of course, depending upon what you see, you can end up with multiple different avenues after that. So I think that's why it's sometimes difficult to manage expectations for the community. But at least if we can commit to some of that early work, then they can at least understand the process and understand their complaint is being listened to.
All I was going to say is trying to do exactly what you said. It's managing perceptions. It's managing the actual reception of this particular activity, customer perceptions. I think I'd agree. It's a very good document. It's one that Dartford Borough Council should have, perhaps in some respect. I didn't say that, but it is a good document. And as long as people can find it and know it's there. The one thing I always moan about Dartford is they've got the stuff there, but you can never find anything precise. But people know it's there, and they might think twice about doing stuff. And the only other point is that I think that's important, because I've noticed that in some of the there are already people applying to change their garages into livable space, which I abhor personally. I don't agree with that at all, but it's it's one of those sort of things. And I know of people who've done that without asking permission, and it's they keep the door there and they hide it behind. So I think it's good that you've got this in place so people know, keep an eye out for things like that.
I think we've tried to be proactive. I think a lot of time with residents, sometimes they do things knowingly, but quite often I think it's genuinely they're not aware. Yeah. We have over the past few years published some resident guides, one for each of the main sites, that sort of sets out some of the planning stuff and the things you do and maybe don't need permission for. So how often they're used, I don't know, but we do occasionally push them through the social medias. Our comms manager sort of does that. So something similar to this, but I see that being a bit complementary in terms of that approach to being proactive and avoiding problems before we get to the legal.
No, I agree entirely. I mean, there's plenty of platforms out there on the social media just to let people know that when this is done, signed off and finished, where they can go and find that.
Mhm.
You know, I think that the councillors here would definitely the kind of people you want to talk to about that, and of course other sources as well.
I think we try to keep it fairly short and not too scary.
No, I thought it was great.
So something that maybe people can. It's very flipped through and understandable. Very powerful. Pretty pictures do a lot, don't they? So
I think that's,
That's what I thought. Yeah, and I thought it was very readable, actually, very easy. I mean, and I've got some insight now into planning, but even then, I thought it was
Yeah.
quite straightforward, and that was really helpful.
good that it's not too long, so it's accessible to people.
You test a little bit more about whether or not, you could make an anonymous claim, because, often people are really struggling, there may be something untoward going on, and if they're elderly or frail, they feel vulnerable. It is a challenge. I mean, equally, I get that you get people that are making vexatious claims, especially from a competing business. But is there not some way of managing that? That if maybe you simply email back and say, well, would you like to have a confidential phone call? Or do you see what I mean? Because otherwise there's potentially a swathe of the community that is struggling because there's a breach of planning and they've got no redress. I don't feel confident,
I think I agree with that. I think in previous considerations, you could have a filter. I mean, if it was an elected local authority, say you go to your councillor.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's what this.
This
Yeah, it
does
does.
say, yeah, let's say you can go to the councillor rather than put an anonymous.
I think that
Okay.
even though we aren't a local authority, obviously there are still councillors.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
When we engage with the councillors. So I think that's still accepted.
Yes, but I think in that case we should email back saying go to the councillor. I think, if you see what I mean, rather than just goes into the void because it's
Sure, the councils also, if they were to.
Pardon?
It's on page 7.
Oh, sorry, I missed it. Thank you.
And if we bid the councillors to actually distribute, as please go to this on the site link, they could say, want to talk to me about it, put in an introductory narrative. I'm sure Danny would do that. I can't speak for the other two, but it's certainly something.
I think
The reason for it. So the reason for not responding to anonymous.
I think I just thought I automatically thought of it because of the vexatious but I do think that I agree with Valerie that it's possibly a bit of a wall.
yeah,
But if you've identified that they should go to the councillor, that's what they're there for.
I think we'll identify the channel to direct your inquiries through if you do want to remain anonymous. And I think ultimately, depending on the nature of the inquiry as well, I think there's always that element of discretion.
But I maybe suggest that you reserve the right not to follow up anonymous, but don't do it as a policy that you won't, because there might be reasons. An allegation of a very serious breach, if you're pretty bad, you wander around just.
I think you could deal with that by rather than having needs to be changed anyway. It says will be not. So you could take the will out and have may not be considered. So that gives the
an option.
discretion.
Perfect.
And I think the second bullet point, go on and on forever on these ones, but motivated by, and shut up, motivated by planning harm. I'm not sure what that means, because if a breach is causing planning harm, but motivated by planning harm, I think couldn't that just be otherwise inappropriate?
We can look at that, yeah.
Because I think it's a
Necessary fluffy.
No, that's a very good point.
Thank you. Is there anything else on this issue other than to thank those involved in preparing this for a thoughtful paper and So I propose that we accept the recommendation, which means also that if there are other minor changes that need to be made, they can be made.
Let me know. Yes. Anyone's got something.
Absolutely.
Right.
If you do the website.
Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Very good.
That's
Thank you
agreed.
very much. Design quality.
Thank you, Chair. This is a paper that we're bringing to the public section of committee. That's a follow-up on the paper that was brought to the committee back in September. So back in September, that paper highlighted a number of issues post-approval in regards to monitoring design quality. And it set out a number of proposed actions to address those concerns and issues. We then went on to highlight on the dashboard to board back in November that concern. It was flagged with a red to reflect our ongoing concern that risk was still a risk. It still remained a risk that would like to happen and likely to happen in the sooner time period. And I think at November committee, November board requested that we bring a paper back to the committee and to update committee on those actions that we proposed and to reflect on progress made. So this paper basically provides an update on the various actions that were set out in the September paper, progress made. You will see we've color coded it. So the green action reflects those actions that have been completed and are now being implemented. The amber actions are those actions that we're in the process of implementing. And there is one grey action, the first action, where we've completed that action and propose not to follow that or take that forwards. So the recommendations for the report are that the committee notes progress on those actions that have been implemented and invites the view and any additional actions that the committee feel we should be taking to address that ongoing risk around the deterioration in design quality post-planning approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members. Issues on this?
Not really.
I'm sure you're quite right that the grey one needs to be greyed out. I'm supportive.
I mean, I think developing a database of materials used in EBS that are supported is really useful because people can see that. And I suppose you asked for other suggestions. Could we extend that beyond, not quite sure what else it would be, but extend that beyond materials, design approaches?
Sure. Details, for example.
Yes.
Details. Yeah.
And then if we see something good, we say we think it's good.
Yep. Sure. We are in the process of developing some one-page design guidance for certain specific details or elements of typical housing. So that, and we expect to complete that this financial year. So perhaps we bring those one-page design guides back to the committee, which is, I think, reflects the concern you're probably focusing on, Chair. But yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing is checking up on it. Haven't gone, but do we have the resources that we need to? I mean, I think it is important we check up on this because we approve materials, we approve details. And if people don't adhere to the approved details, we've got a problem. But I'm very much in favour of this, but I don't want to put undue stress on the team in following this up. But have you got sufficient resources?
I think, excuse me, and at a time when there's not too many formal enforcement cases, then yes, at times we do have then more complaints from residents and more formal enforcement, and then it feels like we're obviously prioritising enforcement over compliance. So I think at the moment we're okay. We do need to prioritise Adam's time, make sure that he is focusing in on the important bits of different schemes. But I think we just need to monitor.
So in terms of the recommendation, I propose that we note the progress and we thank the officers for doing this, Simon. And the only further action which I would ask be considered is whether the database can be extended to other details. But for you to consider that, not to say we think you should do it, because it might not be practical. Sure. Is everybody content with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we're on to item 7, planning activity report, which is for noting. Is this you, Mark?
Yes, if I can speak without copying, apologies. Yes, this is the activity report in quarter 3. So 100% perform and 100% performance. So thank you for the team for that. I did just want to identify just the data in para 3.3, because the number of applications that fall within the formal reporting data is actually relatively low. We have an awful lot of other cases that are worked on. Obviously, they don't always form part of the actual full reporting. So it was just to identify that and 3.4. Notices in the quarter, but now that we have the enforcement policy in place, the plan in place, I am quite keen to be monitoring year on year the number of complaints that we have, to just try to give the committee a little bit more of an indication. That might help with that question about resourcing as well. So moving forward, we'll try to expand. Apart from that, it's the noting. Thank you.
We note that and say well done on the performance, but watch out to any change of rules on agreeing extensions.
Yeah,
That's going to
definitely on the radar. I do think that we obviously do work incredibly closely with developers here, and if members will be aware of the live application at Cable Wharf School, well, that's been in for some time because the developer had wanted to make design changes. So there's been benefits to do that on the development side as well as on the planning side. So yes, it'd be interesting to see how they.
Delegated items report.
Yep. So short report only for December only. So there's just 9 decisions on there. Obviously, if there are any, or Michael can.
Any questions? No. Well, we note that. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Unless there's any other business, no, that brings the meeting to an end. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.